This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Agun Erev Shabbos Rabbi. We're holding Erev Chanukah, so we want to speak a little bit about the Yom Tov of Chanukah and some of the ways that the Yom Tov was established. We know the Gemara says, L'shana acheres, kavam v'asayim, yamim tovim, v'halel uv'hayda. And the Rambam says, what do we do on Chanukah? Says the Rambam, we say Hallel, that you may Simcha, we say Hallel, and the Rambam says Madlika Neiros, but there is no Posek who says that there's a mitzvah to read some type of document or chronicle of the history of Chanukah. And the question is, why not? The same way on Purim, there is a mitzvah, Midivrei Nevi'im, to read Megillas Esther. There is an ancient document called Megillas Antiochos, which was recorded by the Chashmonaim about the miracle of Chanukah. Why is there no mitzvah to read about the miracle of Chanukah on Chanukah? In fact, the Tosfos Rid in Masechta Sukkah on Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis, Tosfos Rid brings down that there was such an ancient custom to read Megillas Antiochos. The Tosfos Rid even says, "V'chein nami makoim shenargin likroi Megillas Antiochos b'Chanukah ein roi levarech aleha." Even when there's a minhag to learn Megillas Antiochos, you should not make a bracha. Mibnei she'ein shoresh choy b'klal. It is not rooted, not in the Nevi'im and not in the Gemara. And the question is, why not? Why doesn't the Gemara say Hallel Haida u'Mikra Megillah? So there is a wonderful commentary on the Rambam. The name of the commentary is Yad HaMelech by the grandson of the Noda B'Yehuda, Eliezer Segal Landau, and he's going on the Gemara in Erech, and the Gemara over there says and lists all the days that we say Hallel, including the 8 days of Chanukah. So he writes on his third line, and we're not going to read this whole thing. He says, "V'hine anoichi me'oidi ivsa nafshi la'daz." I always wanted to know, Lama lo tiknu kriyas ha-Megillah gam l'neis Chanukah k'ma shetiknu l'neis Esther. Just like they were masakin to lein Megillas Esther, why were they not masakin to lein Megillas Antiochos? Da'arei gam b'neis Chanukah yesh makom la'oisai kavachomer atzmai shehevi ha-Gemara parakama de Megillah. We know the Gemara says in Masechet Megillah Daf Yud Daled, the Gemara says that there were 48 Nevi'im that stood up for the Jewish people. They didn't take away from the Torah except for Mikra Megillah. Ask the Gemara, Mai Darosh. The Gemara says they made a Kavachomer. What's the Kavachomer? Uma me avdus lecheros amrinon shira. If from slavery to freedom we sang shira, mimisa lechayim loy kol. From death to life we have to sing shira. We have to lay in the Megillah. Well, that certainly applies by Chanukah. Times of the Yevanim, they had terrible gezeros on Klal Yisrael. They wanted to murder us. They wanted to kill us. And if that's the case, why don't we say the same Kavachomer? Uma me'avdus lecheros amrinon shira, mimisa lechayim loy kol shekain. That Gemara is referring to Mikra Megillah. And now we're going to get into that Gemara briefly. The Samchlan Sheknesses Hagdolah Haskin Chris Megillas Esther the Darshu Kavachomer from Yitzias Mitzrayim. Dema me'avdus lecheros amru shira. If from slavery to freedom we sing shira, mimavas lechayim loy kol shekain. V'haloi gam neis Chanukah haya mimavas lechayim. Now on this point you could ask, it was mimavas lechayim? Isn't the reason why we don't say Chanukah, we don't celebrate Chanukah with Mishta v'Simcha because they didn't want to try to kill us, they just wanted to take away our religion. And if we would have given in to them and we would have abolished our religion, they would have let us live. So it means they weren't trying to kill us. Yeah, but the bottom line is we weren't going to give up our religion, and therefore they would have been killing us. It was Mimi Salachayim, asked the Yad HaMelech. He says, Gzeres ha'akum, shaya halich v'kasha azal Yisrael v'yamahim, haya oid kasha memisa. It was worse than death. Says the Yad HaMelech, even if you want to say it wasn't death, it was worse than death. Why was it worse than that? Because they want to take away our religion. So you can make the same Kavachomer. If from Avdus Lecherus you should sing Shira, from lack of observance to observance, certainly you should sing Shira. Aside from the captivity and the death, the Gazra Aleim Lavid Avodah Lavir Maldas Koyim Du Marmi Maves. Let's skip the bold print. So you say, what's the kasha? You should lay in the Megillah on Chanukah. We do something better than laying the Megillah on Chanukah. We say Hallel. On Purim, you don't say Hallel. So therefore you have to lay in the Megillah. On Chanukah, you say Hallel, you don't have to lay in the Megillah. After all, the Gemara says in Masechta Megillah, right on that page, the Gemara says, Kriyasa Zuhi Halela, that the Kriyas Megillah takes care of the Hallel. But on Chanukah, we have better than taking care of Hallel. We say Hallel.
What about lighting the candles? Is priest so many nays?
Fine, but why don't you do Mikra Megillah? If we have a Kavachomer to lay in the Megillah on Purim, that Kavachomer applies to Chanukah.
Is there anything to do with Nes Nishka versus Nes Nigla in Purim?
Let's see.
Okay, I'm not
Okay.
shutting up.
No. Ve'ein loimer the Kriyas Hallel shebachanukah hu makom Kriyas Megillah. Don't say Hallel takes the place of Megillah. Uvenes Esther de'ein by Amiras Hallel. Now here's the question: why don't we say Hallel on Purim? Because of Rabbi Yitzchak. Mishum Rabbi Yitzchak. De'ein omrim Hallel al neisha b'chutz la'aretz. On Purim we don't say Hallel because it happened in the chutz la'aretz. So therefore, since you can't say Hallel, we do the next best thing, which is what? Mikra Megillah. Al can't take them by Megillah. But Chanukah, which is a nes in Eretz Yisrael, we could say the real deal. Why would you have to lay in the Megillah? Says the Yad HaMelech. No. On Purim, we don't say Hallel also, because it happened in Chutzar, so we only say Mikra Megillah. But on Chanukah, why wouldn't we do both? He says, Dakati Kosh, Lamaloi Tiknu B'neis Chanukah Tarti, Amiras Hallel, V'gam Kriyas Megillah. Just like the Gemara over there, Masechet Megillah asked by Esther, after the Gemara says, we lay in the Megillah, the Gemara asks, so say Hallel also. And the Gemara answers that we don't say Hallel on Anes Chutzaretz. Harei lanu befeirush demnes Esther hayanesh be'Eretz Yisrael. Right? You see in the Gemara that if the miracle of Purim happened in Eretz Yisrael, what would we do on Purim? Hallel and Megillah. So Chanukah happened in Eretz Yisrael. So why don't you do Hallel and Megillah? Harei demnes Esther hayanesh be'Eretz Yisrael. Harei tarti amir savagam Chris Megillah. So therefore, we should say both. And then he says, well, maybe we hold like the answer of Nachman. And the answer of Nachman is, reading the Megillah takes place of Hallel. That means according to Rav Nachman, you don't have to say both. So, that means Kriyas HaMegillah is the Hallel. So, maybe we could say for Chanukah, Hallel is the Megillah. So he says you can't say that, because the first answer of the Gemara is Rabbi Yitzchak. And in Rabbi Yitzchak, really we would say both on Purim, if not for the fact that it happened in Chutz La'aretz. And also, if Rav Nachman said laning the Megillah is Hallel, that means if not for the fact that laning the Megillah is Hallel, we would also say Hallel. That means Rav Nachman argues on Rabbi Yitzchak. And since we hold like Rabbi Yitzchak, and what is Rabbi Yitzchak hold? That we don't say Hallel on the Nes of Chutz La'aretz, so therefore we should say both. In other words, the first answer of the Gemara doesn't hold like Rav Nachman. And since we hold like Rabbi Yitzchak, and the Rif and the Rosh paskin like Rabbi Yitzchak, that we don't say Hallel in Merkum Chutz La'aretz, that means we push Rav Nachman out of halacha. All we have is the first answer, that we don't say Hallel Nes of Chutz La'aretz, but otherwise we would say both. And therefore, the Yad HaMelech has a question: why don't we lane Megillas, Antiochos, or some account of the Chanukah story on Chanukah? I will let you knock out and try to understand what the Yad HaMelech's answer is. But at this point, I want to bring you to number 4. There's a Sefer on Masechta Shabbos called Isha Yisrael, written by Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, and he brings down the kasha of the Yad HaMelech, which, by the way, maybe the first person to ask this question was none other than the Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. And the Isha Yisrael quotes the question of the Yad HaMelech, and the Isha Yisrael says, I don't understand the question to begin with. What are you going to lane on Chanukah? What do you expect to lane? The Art Scroll book on Chanukah? What are you going to lane? A book about Chanukah? Which book? There's no authorized book. Because the Gemara says in Masechta Yuma, number 7 on your sheet, in Parak, in Tehillim, It compares Esther to the morning star. And the Gemara asks, Amar Rav Asi, Lama nimshla Esther l'shachar. Ma shachar soif kol halayla, just like the morning is the end of the night. Af Esther soif kol hanisim. Esther is the last of the miracles. What do you mean Esther is the last of the miracles? V'ha'ika Chanukah, there's Chanukah. Yeah. No! It's the last of the miracles that could be written down. So Purim is the last of the miracles that can be written down. Chanukah cannot be written down. Right? You hear what the Gemara is saying? That Purim is the last, Esther is the last of the miracles that are allowed to be transcribed. That means Chanukah cannot be transcribed. So what are you going to read?
Why was Esther the last of the miracles?
Okay, we'll have to get to that. We're going to talk about that now. But the Gemara is saying that the last miracle that was allowed to be transcribed was Purim. So ask the Isha Yisrael, what would you like us to read on Chanukah? Nothing could be written down about Chanukah. Now, I do want to bring to your attention, maybe tonight you'll have time, Reb Tzvi Elimelech Midinov, the Bnei Yissaschar, wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avos called Dvarim Nechmadim, and in the last 2 pages he has Chidushim on Chanukah, where he brings down this question of Reb Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchov, why were they not Mesakin to lay Mikra Megillah on Chanukah? To which the Bnei Yissaschar offers a very Kabbalistic answer, and he says, if he said something improperly, God should forgive him. And I'll let you, maybe tonight, through the Kedusha Shabbos, you'll understand possibly what he means to say. And I'll leave that for you as well. But the answer of the Isha Yisrael is that the reason why there is no takana to read about the story of Chanukah is Chanukah is loy nitein li kasev. So now let's, with our moments that remain, let's try to understand why. Why was Purim allowed to be written down and Chanukah not allowed to be written down? Okay? So there is a sefer called Bina Le'itim. The Bina Le'itim was written by Rabbi Azariah Figo. Rabbi Azariah Figo, not a name you hear every day. Not a name you heard in yeshiva. Rabbi Azariah Figo, the author of Gidulei Truma. And he's has very interesting comments to make. He writes in one place, one of the reasons why the Golus has lasted so long is because Jews don't pay taxes to the government. Because he says Golus needs to be Golus. So when you try to finagle out of the Golus, Hashem says, no problem, you're not doing your time.
That's on tape.
Okay, anyway, but that has nothing to do with the Shiur. Brought to you by the Internal Revenue Service. But Bina Itim says, look at number 6. Me'ata yeshkan makom hisayros. Ki acharei golos Bavel, after the Babylonian exile, asher adayin lo hitaharnu mimenu, which we are still suffering from, because we were never zocha to geula ela pekida. That's a chiddush we once said, important chiddush. Shtayim hena kairoisenu misakanois atzumais. We had, throughout our history, 2 salvations. Asher histaragnu ulai al tzavarenu umishteyim hitzalnu. Number 1 was we may Haman Rasha, that we have the Yom Tov of Purim, and on the 3rd line, v'habez we may Antiochos, that to spread that miracle, there were 8 days of Chanukah. Why, asked the Bino Litim Rav Zariah Figo, why was Mordechai ben Kish, that the miracle happened through him, why was he zocheh to so much kavod through the story of Purim that's recorded in the Megillah, and on Chanukah, they lost out on the spotlight. You know, Vayehi b'mei Antiochos, right? That would have been nice. Of Hagia Yehuda, right? You could have had a whole nice Megillah, right?
A bad guy to clap. That was the problem.
So, what happened to the Chanukah story? All we do is we say Hallel and we say Alanisim. Why not? And especially in light of the Gemara Masechta Yuma, that Chanukah is not Nitein Li Kasev. V'hi Gufa Tikshi. They're both miracles. Why was one Nitein Li Kasev and the other not? So the Bina Itim offers 4 answers. Let's try to get the gist of it. Ha'echad. The more general the miracle, the more you need to remember it. The more specific the miracle, then only the beneficiaries of the miracle are required to remember it. When Reuven has a chasana, could Shimon care less? Shimon doesn't care. All he has, Shimon, I have a chasana tonight. I have to shell out $100 and I have to waste 5.5 hours. Shimon cares about Reuven's chasana, right? So,
It's a long time ago.
right. Therefore, v'hinei nes Chanukah. Im heyoisei ba'atzmai god v'atzmai lo hayu kol l'chol Yisrael. Right? You see that? That's v'hinei nes Chanukah. He says the miracle of Chanukah was not for all of the Jewish people. Who was in danger? The Jews in Israel. Jews in Israel. Did you ever learn Sefer Ivadia? The Jews already in Europe. There are Jews in France. There are Jews in Spain. There are Jews everywhere. So who benefited from Chanukah? A small minority of Jews. Therefore, all we need to do is light the candles. But the miracle of Esther, how many, right? Ha-moilech? And therefore, Mordechai was zoicha to more pirsum. Mordechai got his own book. Shimon HaTzadik, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he didn't get his own book. He got a little mention in the Al HaNisa. Number 2.
Esther got a book. Mordecai was just mentioned in passing.
Mordechai is mentioned 54 times. That's pretty good. 54 times in Megillas Esther. That's pretty good. What?
2 times
Tam Sheni. The second reason. The tsaros of Antiochos were when Klal Yisrael were in Eretz Yisrael. And when the Beis HaMikdash is standing, they definitely had the Zechus HaMakayim, and they had the sanctity of the Beis HaMikdash to protect them and to bring about the miracle, especially it happened in Eretz Yisrael. Tamid Eini Hashem Elokecha Ba. But the times of Achashverosh, they were scattered all over the world. They were in Chutz La'aretz. That's a Pele. Would God perform miracles outside of the Holy Land? And therefore it's more worthy of commemoration when it's V'yaf Gam Zois, V'yoisam, V'yeretz Oyaveim, Lo Ma'astim, V'lo Ga'altim, L'chaloisam. And therefore it is more noteworthy when the miracle happens in Chutz La'aretz. So why don't we lane? Vayihi Bimei Antiochos. The answer is because it's not as noteworthy. Even though you could say, well, 1 second, Hanukkah is 8 days, and Purim is 1 day. But now we're focused on the storyline. The storyline of Purim is more impressive. Okay.
To this, why do we say Hallel if it only happened to such a small number of people?
Hallel you say all the time. Rosh Chodesh. No. Okay. Third reason.
Don't go there.
Third reason. V'yesh oy tam shlishi. There is a third reason. Ki bizman Antiochos ikare hagzeres haskana hayal davar noge elav yisparach b'ma sharatzu levato miso shmiras hamitzvos b'sakanas hagufa yisois tefillah zeh v'hu mevuar ki b'yoisam noge mechvaydo yizbarach takel ma'oid hanakama mehem, because he's going to do it laman shemai. But the gzer of Haman, they only try to destroy our bodies. Even though they had a motivation to remove our religion, but they wanted to destroy us. That needs a bigger chesed of Hashem. In other words, the following. In the times of Chanukah, their main goal was to abolish Torah mitzvahs. Our suffering was subsidiary. So for God to make a miracle, is He causing honor to the Jewish people? No, it's primarily honoring His own name. That's much easier for Hashem to do. That's making a miracle, Laman Shemai. That's a Kiddush Hashem Shamayim. And therefore, that it requires less chusim and it's less impressive. But when the thing that's on the line is our body, and not God's honor, so now Hashem says, should I do it for you? That's more impressive. That's a bigger chesed. That requires more effort, kaviyachal. That requires God to extend Himself more than in times of Chanukah. The Baruch Shalom is doing it for His honor, for His Torah, for His mitzvahs. And therefore, it requires less of a commemoration. And number 4, says the Bina Li'itim, this is in the paragraph that begins Amnam on the 6th line, which is based on the Medrash. that says, "Vayomer Hamela, Vayomer Haman HaKesef Nasun Lach V'Ham LaSois V'Kater B'Einecha," and the Gemara brings a mashal. Mashal Ma'adavar Doimer. You have two people. One guy has a pit. One guy has a mound. The guy with the pile of dirt says, "If only I could find a hole to put the dirt in." The guy with the hole says, "If only I could find dirt to put in my hole." So too with the Jewish problem. Achashverosh had a mound of dirt. He had a bunch of Jews, and Haman had a hole in the ground. Jews. So they both said Achashverosh was looking a place to put his dirt, and Haman was looking for dirt to put in his hole. So they both hated Jews, and they got together. They collaborated. Ki haloi shneim hushvu b'sanasam liYisrael. Says the Bina Leitim that Achashverosh deemed the Jewish people as honorable and as worthy, like a mound of dirt, but as dangerous. And Haman considered us like dust. So therefore, that's the analogy. Achashverosh considered, in other words, there's a big kasha. If Haman and Achashverosh both wanted to destroy us, how did Haman was what? No? What happened to Haman? What happened to him?
Hung. Scot-free Achashverosh.
Was he hung or hanged?
Picture is hung. He was hanged.
He was hanged, thank you. Haman was hanged. And Achashverosh went scot-free and he continued to rule over the world. How? They both wanted to do the same thing. How come Achashverosh got the better end of the deal and Haman got the raw end of the deal? The answer is Achashverosh was machsh of the Jewish people. He just hated us. We were like a tall mound of dirt. Haman considered us dust and ashes. That's why he compared us to a pit. But bottom line is, they both wanted to kill us. So, it was matzah minas minai. So therefore, says the Bina Litim, V'atarei on the 5th line. Kama gadol koyach neshel Haman mineshel Achashman. Beli erech v'dimyan. Ki az lo hayar sham rak mashehu yizbarach ha'isiv teis koyach v'koyhanim akdoshim v'zgal levim v'natzer shaloi k'minag hateva. Aval lo hayar b'zeh shum arisas ha'bechiroi meniyas haratzon l'shum ben adam. Hashem, all he did was, he gave these Chashmonaim power and might to destroy the enemy, but he didn't have to interfere with anyone's free will. But by Achashverosh, Hashem had to go against nature. Because Achashverosh hated the Jews. He already signed a document to destroy the Jewish people. And it would have been very easy for him to carry it out. What did Hashem have to do? He had to twist and turn Achashverosh's free will and turn him from a Rasha who hates the Jewish people to an Oyev Yisrael. That's much harder to do. God, a war. For somebody to win a war, Rabbi Miyad Ma'atim, you have a country in peril, and somehow a small army is able to defeat a massive army, big deal. But when God starts to manipulate people who hate us, and somehow they become our supporters, it's much more difficult for God to manipulate someone's free will. Hashem had to take Achashverosh, who hated us, who already signed a document, and rescind the document. Esther said, you know what? You hate the Jews. Why don't you protect us? And Achashverosh said, yeah, good idea. God doesn't do that normally. So therefore, says the Bina Leitim, this is a 4th reason why we don't lane the story of the Megillah. Let me end off by telling you something that I heard from Rabbi Victor Miller, I even have it in my notes. And he said a very important thing. Chanukah is lo'nitain likasev, and this is probably most fundamental of all. Says Rabbi Victor Miller, why is Chanukah not in the Tanakh? You have something called, I believe in the New Testament, Lahavdil, Elvav, the Book of the Maccabees. But we don't have it in our Tanakh. The answer is the Book of the Maccabees is the most important book for Lahavdil, the Christians. It is their most important document. Why? You know why? Because they have a big kasha. I have a kasha, the Christians have a big kasha. For thousands of years, God speaks to the prophets. And then Malachi is the last prophet. And Malachi was in the beginning of Vayesheni. And then Yashka comes along hundreds of years later, after God never spoke to anybody. And all of a sudden Yashka speaks to God. Hayitachein, that prophecy ceased for hundreds of years, and all of a sudden after hundreds of years, God wakes up and speaks to the Yozel. So how do they faren for it? We're going to try to get as much prophecy in between Chagai Zechariah Malachi and Yashka as possible. So what do? They throw in as many books into their Bible to bridge the gap between Malachi and the Mamzer. So what do? They throw in the book of the Maccabees. But for the Jewish people, the book of the Maccabees is apocryphal, right? Apocryphal. Why is it apocryphal? Because Nevuah stopped. There was no prophecy. And to be part of Tanakh, to be codified in Tanakh, you need to have Nevuah. The Tanakh is not a storybook. You know why Chanukah is loinite likasev? Because Nevuah ended. And it's very important that Nevuah ended, because all the world religions, other than us, which are nonsensical, and they began hundreds of years after the close of Nevuah, God wasn't speaking to human beings anymore. And therefore Chanukah, which was in the interim, was loy nitain likase, because it was not b'nevuah, and therefore it is very important for a Jew to know that all of the books about Chanukah do not have kedushas Tanakh. Are they accurate? It doesn't matter if they're accurate. It's irrelevant. We don't read books in shul that are accurate. That's not the criteria. Could we read it? Is it accurate? We read books of prophecy. And Megillas Antiochos was not written b'nevuah, was not written b'ruach HaKodesh. And it's critical to know that our whole Yahadus stands on the fact that Megillas Antiochos was not given Baruch HaKodesh. But all the false religions, what?
There was, you say.
Esther Avada, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Nemra. In fact, Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev says, Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai came down with Megillas Esther. How's that possible? Take a look in the Dvarim Nechmadim of the Bnei Yissaschar. You can look at it all the time. But it's fundamental to our religion that Chanukah is loinitein likasev, and that's what we celebrate, lahayos or lahalel, but not with any recitation of a Megillah. Rabbi say,
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.